Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our meeting. Before our meeting begins, we'll have an invocation offered by Commissioner Twine, followed by the moment of silence for two people who have passed, and then the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes, we'd like to first do a moment of silence for Charlie Singer, who was a city employed from 1978 to 1998, and Lovey Level, who served on the city's Fair Housing Board since 2009, and most recently, the merged ADA and Fair Housing Board. After the moment of silence, I'll go into my prayer. Lord, we thank you for your blessings this day. We thank you for your grace and mercy, and we ask that you will bestow us with wisdom and guidance as we go about the city's business this day. These things we ask in your name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Professor, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Brady?
Here.
Mr. Lockhart?
Here.
Mr. Murray?
Here.
Ms. Lloyd? Here. Ms. Twine?
Here.
Mr. Waddington?
Here. Waddington, there was a noise during the moment of silence. Is that your stomach?
It's the coffee maker.
Oh, the coffee maker.
Yeah.
Mr. Thinking about me.
Mr. Lockhart.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we excuse Mr. Poole, Commissioner Poole.
Second.
Been a motion, second discussion. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Mr. Poole is excused. Commissioners, you have before you the minutes of our meeting of January 8, 2018. What is your wish?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waddington.
I move that we accept the minutes of the January 22nd meeting and dispense with the formal reading. There's a correction.
Second.
Been a motion, second discussion. Without objection, the motion will be approved, and hearing no objection, the motion is approved. Return to audience participation. Anyone wishing to address any of the agenda items? Step to the microphone, give us your name and address, and share with us your thoughts.
Sharon Johnson, 1139 Fifth Street. You're about ready to legislate some truck parts here at $50,000. It's a crane and dump body, and the money is coming out of Issue 8 infrastructure. I think the city is stretching infrastructure definition a little bit too thin. Taking things out of infrastructure like this, we won't have anything for the streets. It just depletes the street fund. An example of that coming up here, which I read in the city manager's report, I don't know if this is going to go down tonight or not, but to Cedar Point, their pathway that they're building out there, they want a matching grant from us, if the state approves, of $570,000, and that's coming out of the infrastructure. So, I mean, how do we get any streets out of this if this keeps up? Thank you.
Hey, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners. Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. If they're making coffee, it's going to be a long night, so I'm going to make this real brief, try to help this meeting move along a little bit. My statement and questions pertain to item number 10 on the agenda, which is the ODNR non-motorized boating access project grant. The total project is $179,000 and change, $88,000 in grant money, and $90,000 from the city. The supporting documentation did not give a breakdown of the $90,000 from the city. It states that there's a collaboration between Paddle and Climb, which is a local business, and Adaptive Adventures out of Colorado. So at the point in which we discuss this, maybe somebody can give a breakdown, whether it's financial, some kind of in-kind, contribution. But I would think that there should be some monetary contribution from those, one or both of those entities. The other question would be, are the two outside companies, Climb and Paddle and Adaptive Adventures, kind of requiring that the three top sites be part of the agreement, or if they aren't, those three sites aren't part of the agreement, that their money goes away or their services go away? And the concern I want to share is all three of these sites are technically and demographically in the downtown area. Two of them are within walking distance. The one would be here at the Sadler Sailing Basin. The other one would be Shoreline Park. Isn't it about time that we maybe throw the west side a little crumb and move Lyons Park up to the top of that list for this grant, and maybe eliminate one of the spots that we're proposing here, which are in the downtown area? Thank you.
Just put $700,000 in
Anyone else?
I'd like to address two
Sir,
things. Tom
would you-
Haley.
Would you mind stepping to the microphone so the folks at home can hear you?
Tom Haley, 214 Shelby Street. Item 4, miscellaneous purchase from Core in Maine. We have got a street right across from me, Lincoln Street. I'm sure that's where the fund comes out for putting this new main and fire hydrant in at that section. That was started last fall. It only had to go 1 block, and it is still not completed. I was just wondering why. I mean, it was started last fall. They only had to go 1 block between Shelby and Pearl with this line. It is still not completed. The next issue I would like to talk about is the infrastructure. Chief Ortez will tell you, if you've got a motorized wheelchair, you're not to ride on the street.
Which agenda item is this, sir?
The infrastructure of our sidewalks in downtown, this wheel is 8 months old.
Sir, which agenda item are you addressing?
Oh, the infrastructure is on that, about the price on the crane and stuff like that, and the infrastructure would be,
Your concerns are legitimate, sir. I don't mean to suggest otherwise. But we're talking about the agenda items. I'm not sure that ties in right now.
I'm not sure either, but the sidewalks in this town, now my son and my wife both are in wheelchairs. They ride no farther than from Shelby Street to the downtown area. This is an 8-month-old wheel that is not under warranty. I just replaced 8 of them at $80 a piece. I don't know. I think you need to take care of the sidewalks as well as the streets so that people can get around this town. These wheels are supposed to last 5 years. This one made it 8 months. I replaced all 8 of them. It's ridiculous. You try to walk down these streets from here to Shelby Street, and if you're not watching where you're walking, I guarantee you trip.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else wishing to address the commission on any of our agenda items? If not, then we have two presentations. A presentation and a proclamation. And with us tonight is Mr. Alexander Jones from the Ohio Auditor of State's Office to present the Ohio Auditor's Award.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here tonight on behalf of State Auditor Dave Yost. For those of you in the room who don't know me, Alex Jones, 1606 Central Avenue. I just want to start off by saying that you guys have put yourself in to a very, very select category. We're going to give out, roughly 6,000 audits this year. And of those 6,000 clients that we're going to audit, about 5%, a little less than 5%, are going to get this award. It's about 300. Now, that is a credit not only to the commission and the manager and the finance director for setting up such a culture of proper accounting and bookkeeping, but it is for those of you who don't know, I also coach Sandusky football, and I can tell you firsthand that no good thing like this comes without good teamwork. So first and foremost, I want to congratulate your finance director and his team. I think it goes without saying that he's done good work, his team's done good work, and we're here to recognize that tonight. So in order to receive this award, I just want to kind of put this out there. The entity, Sandusky, must file a timely financial report in the form of a comprehensive annual financial report, and their audit must be free of any findings for recovery, material citations, material weaknesses, significant deficiencies, single audit findings, or question costs. The management letter also must contain no comments referring to ethics referrals, question costs of less than $10,000, lack of a timely report submission, any reconciliations, failure to obtain timely single audits, findings for recovery less than $100, or public meetings or records concerns. So, as you can tell, just by that laundry list of things that you have to accomplish, this isn't something that's easy to get. So, at this time, I'm not going to sit up and take a whole bunch of your time, but at this time, I do want to congratulate you, and I want to present the city of Sandusky, specifically Mr. Hank Sulloway, for all their hard work with this Ohio Auditors of State Award with distinction. Thank you.
I was going to thank you for making the drive from Columbus, but shorter than that, I didn't know that you were a resident of the community, so all the more thanks for being here.
Yes.
Special to be awarded by one of our own. And Mr. Soloway, we as a community and as a commission can disagree on a lot of things, but it is so terribly important that we know that we don't disagree about the facts, we don't disagree about the numbers. There are no fake facts and fake news when it comes to numbers. And you and your team have done really a great job of making sure that everyone knows exactly where we stand. And I appreciate that support.
He kind of stole my thunder. I know my name's on the award, but as he mentioned, it's a team award. And I know I say this every time we get these, but really without the diligent work of all our department heads, law director, city manager, commission, finance committee, everybody works hard year-round to preserve our financial integrity, and it's really a team effort. It's really a team award. So, with that, I thank everybody for this achievement. So,
Thank you.
thank you guys.
Thanks for being here. We have a proclamation that is going to be presented by Mr. Waddington in support of the United Way of Erie County and the Give Where You Live campaign.
Whereas the mission of the United Way of Erie County is to improve lives, strengthen the community by fighting for the health, education, financial stability of every person in the city of Sandusky and Erie County. Whereas its vision is to create a positive, lasting change by helping children succeed in school, promoting family financial stability, improving people's health, and advancing the common good by creating opportunities for a better life. Whereas the United Way, Erie County Board of Directors, President, CEO, and staff leadership, energy, guidance, encouragement, hands-on labor to our community through financial support aimed at improving the quality of life around us. And whereas it takes every part of a community, individuals, businesses, and organizations to supply passion, expertise, resources needed to create a lasting change in order to improve the lives and build stronger communities. And whereas United Way of Erie County for 95 years has invested financial support back into local agencies, programs from their fundraising campaigns. And whereas locally funded agencies encourage others to improve the quality of life through civic, health, and human service organizations, avoiding duplicate efforts. And whereas, in the most simple terms, when you live united and make a community investment of your time and give from the heart, financially our community is a better place where more people live with hope and opportunity. Now therefore, be it resolved, I, Dave Waddington of the Sandusky City Commission, do hereby proclaim the months of February and March 2018 2018 United Way of Erie County Give Where You Live campaign months, and hereby urge all citizens to express their appreciation to the community nonprofits through a generous donation to United Way of Erie County, dated this 12th day of February 2018. There you go. Thank you.
If I could just thank the commission for allowing us to be here tonight and making this proclamation. It's just very important for us to make sure that the people of Erie County, the people of Sandusky understand that when you make a contribution United Way, when you support our agency, the money stays here in Erie County and helps Erie County residents. We know that on a daily basis, you're bombarded with information on nonprofits from all over the world and all over our country, but our money stays here and helps our folks, so it's very important. So thank you very much. We appreciate this.
Thank you.
All right, we have a number of communications from staff recommending various pieces of legislation. Would someone care to make a motion to accept those?
So moved.
Second.
The motion second. Without objection, the motion will be approved. And hearing no objection, the motion is approved. Mrs. Cresser, would you present item number 1, please?
Item number 1 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to expend funds to the Erie Regional Planning Commission in the amount of $21,750 for the Erie County US 6 Corridor Planning Study Project, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Twine.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Then a motion and second. Discussion. Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd? Yes. Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd? Yes. Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 2, please.
Item 2 is a resolution adopting the consent legislation submitted by the Director of the Ohio Department of Transportation for their bridge deck gravity-fed resin repair project, PID number 94444, authorizing and directing the city manager to sign the consent legislation and to execute any necessary contracts with the Director of Transportation to complete the project, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Lloyd.
I move for the adoption of this resolution under the suspension of the rules and in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Then a motion and second. Discussion. Mr. Klein, we're not expending any money at this point in time, but we, depending upon conditions in the field, might very well expend money. Could you elaborate a little bit about what that potential liability might look like and what we'd be spending that for?
Yeah, Mr. President, this item and item number 3, both are items that ODOT presented to us. They want to do some work on State Route 2. And there's a piece of it that's inside the city of Sandusky. It's a very small piece. And what they're asking for is to do routine maintenance on their portion of it. And they're just saying that if, because it's in the city, they need our approval to do the work. If they encounter something or we ask for them to do something during the project, then that cost would be at our expense, but at this time, we don't foresee any request of that magnitude.
Okay, thank you. Additional questions or comments, commissioners? Mr. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion first, please?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the resolution?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
That resolution is adopted. Item number 3, please.
Item 3 is a resolution adopting the consent legislation submitted by the Director of the Ohio Department of Transportation for their guardrail upgrades on US Route 6 and US Route 250 overpass project, PID number 106418, authorizing and directing the city manager to sign the consent legislation to execute any necessary contracts with the Director of Transportation to complete the project, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Twine.
I move for the adoption of this resolution under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Motion second, discussion. Mr. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the resolution?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
That resolution is adopted. Item number 4, please.
Item 4 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to expend funds to Core and Main LP of Ashland, Ohio for the purchase of materials and parts for in-house water main repairs, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second, discussion. Mr. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 5, please.
Item 5 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a one-year contract extension with Browning Ferris Industries of Ohio Incorporated, doing business as Republic Services of Sandusky, Ohio, for yard waste collection services in calendar year 2018, which is available for the period of April 1, 2018 through December 31, 2018, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
And a motion and second, discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Brady.
Mr. Klein and I discussed this issue at a meeting earlier today, and I think it's, the legislation is fairly self-explanatory. But a topic that came up during our discussion is perhaps outside this legislation, we could spend a couple dollars advertising this service that the city offers. We know we have, for the 645 customers that took advantage of it last year, they are going to be opted into the program again. If they want out, they can certainly get out. But our concern is that we think there may be a lot more people that may want to take advantage of this and simply don't know about it. So I think perhaps we can just leave it up to the city manager to perhaps come up with a plan as to how we can advertise this, whether it be through something through the paid advertisement or get it in perhaps on our sewer bill like we've done in the past. We could do some type of an announcement to our water customers. Just a couple suggestions. Thank you.
Additional discussion. Mr. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 6, please.
Item 6 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a contract with ABC Piping Company of Brooklyn Heights, Ohio, for the Venice Road Pump Station Improvements Project, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules and in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second, discussion. Mr. Klein, this is a big ticket item, and it's not an ordinary pump. It's not even an ordinary lift station. This is a really big one. Could you give us a little bit of context in terms of why these things are so expensive? Talk a little bit about how many we have. I think you've talked about this a little in the past. You've got a regular maintenance schedule, and we get to these things on a progressive basis. so that we are not dealing with them when they're failed, but maybe you could explain to the public why we're spending this much money.
Yes, sir, Mr. President. The lift stations throughout the city, at this point, we're working hard to improve them. We've done a lot of work through our long-term control plan to expand the wastewater treatment plant. But one of the items that we've left out, and you heard Mr. Solway a couple of weeks ago talk about the infrastructure grade in the city, and this is one of those items. The lift stations are something that we're working hard to improve. Out on Venice Road, it's the lift station on the corner where Margaritaville and the new wayfinding signage is. And that one is an older lift station. The building is older, and some of the controls are older as well. We had a piece of equipment fail earlier this last year, and we had to replace that piece of equipment. And the work that we're doing on this lift station is to help the entire west end of the city. So there's all the sewers that go out there. There's the sewer that runs down Venice Road and over to the wastewater treatment plant. We've got about 18 to 20 of these lift stations, and we're putting a couple more stormwater lift stations in the city. But I think we only have a couple more that we need to make improvements on. This is the one out on the chaussee right now, and we've got a couple others that we need to do improvements on, and we should be in pretty good shape for these, for all the lift stations throughout the city.
Okay, thank you. This must be one of the bigger ones. I don't think I recall spending this much on one before, at least in a while. Okay. Thank you. Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Brady?
I think it's important to point out, too, that these pumps owe us nothing. The last time we did work out there was in 2008, and I don't think we replaced the pumps in 2008. So they probably are plus that. It's one of these things that I think we can expect, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Klein, but I think we can expect less CSOs out of this, combined sewer overflows, because of this improvement. But this is not necessarily going to solve any type of a flooding issue or all of the flooding issues that some of our residents do experience out there. So I don't want to get the expectations to the point where they're unreasonable.
Mr. President,
Fine.
this lift station is one that it operates around 2 million gallons per day, and we're going to expand that capacity and over double it. So this is something we do get a lot of inflow and infiltration from the sewer laterals, those private laterals, and a lot of the sewers on that west end of town. We've done quite a bit on the sewers by lining them, but we still get a lot of that infiltration through the joints and through broken pipes. So this is something that we do have to get sewer crews out there during rain events, during high flow events, to make sure that we set up generators and do that type of work. So we're calling people in on overtime to make sure we aren't bypassing and overflowing to the nearby Cold Creek. So this project is also going to include installation of that generator to make sure we don't have to respond accordingly. So this is something new at that lift station that'll help out, reducing our response time to other lift stations that might need that generator.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Additional questions or comments? Mr. Crosser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 7, please.
Item 7 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to expend the funds for the purchase and installation of a Ferrari 551R A3 crane and galleon stainless steel dump body from Kaleida Truck Equipment Incorporated of Walbridge, Ohio, for the Division of Forestry, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Twine?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Got a motion and second. Discussion. Mr. Webster and Mr. Soloway, this question comes up periodically. We have, some folks believe that infrastructure is simply limited to streets and sidewalks, but The legislation that we passed was broader than that, and so I know you track the money that we spent on issue 8. And, you know, the city only has so many hard physical assets that we're beyond its buildings that are infrastructure, streets, parks, and then, of course, the trucks and the cars that last more than a year, so they are properly regarded as infrastructure. And I know you track that, and you would not allow this money to be spent if it didn't comply with our ordinance.
Correct. It's a broad category, and I know a lot of people are hung up on the word infrastructure and spending it on playground equipment, on vehicles, on street projects. When we set up the 3 accounts that we track the issue 8, the other 2 are much easier to understand because one's for blight and housing, the other's for economic development. Those are pretty straightforward. Well, the third one, which is the biggest funding allocation of $1.5 million, was for a variety of things. And actually one thing that has come out of that discussion with some of our department heads and with the city manager is that $1.5 million, we're actually going to set up new sub-accounts, so it doesn't all just go into one account called infrastructure. We're gonna segregate each account for different purposes going forward, and we're in the process of working on that, so it's set up this year, because I think it's caused a lot of confusion as to, you know, using it for infrastructure. We're actually gonna parse it out and have other categories, so it's easier to track for the directors, so, but to your point, yeah, it's proper public use for what it's stated here.
Thank you, so much. Swoopser.
Through the commission president to the commission, just to build on what Director Soloway said, the original estimates when the issue 8 campaign was passed was that we'd be able to set aside about $1 million a year for infrastructure. And as Hank mentioned, we're actually doing about $1.5 million. So as revenues have come in above expectations, we've pushed as much of that as possible actually into that infrastructure fund. And in addition to better categorizing that, we've been able to triple what we had been doing pre-issue 8 for local street resurfacing, while also creating programs for sidewalks and trees, and then filling that backlog of vehicles and park upgrades. So we think we've done a good job to the extent possible of meeting the expectations of the community and the commission by creating those programs. We know that our sidewalks, our streets, et cetera, aren't exactly where we want them to be, but we also know that we're making investments that are much larger than the city's been able to make in decades in that infrastructure, and we'll do our best to find resources and to spread that money as far as we can to make the biggest impact.
Thank you, Mr. Swoopser. I know the gentleman, I didn't catch your name, sir.
Tom Haley.
Mr. Haley, thank you. I know you spoke to the issue of the sidewalks that you traverse as being in terrible condition. And I walk around the city a great deal, and I try to bicycle sometimes on the sidewalks, and I know exactly what you mean. But it took us about 35 years to get to the point that we were. We have been investing a lot of money in streets and sidewalks. We are getting better, but it's going to take us a couple more years to get certainly where we want to be. So your point is well taken, but we are making those investments to make the sidewalks better.
My point was, these chairs are supposed to last 5 to 6 years. The chair this wheel came off of is 8 months old. I've got to replace all 4 wheels at $80 a piece.
I'm sorry for that, but we are working. Mr. Lockhart.
But if we ride on the street, somebody else will stop and say, you need to be on the sidewalk. So we go up on the side. My son's one that if he says, you gotta go on the sidewalk.
I'm sorry, sir, I recognize Mr. Lockhart so he can speak.
Yeah. Mr. Haley, I'm the liaison to the ADA and Fair Housing Committee. And so when we get together, we discuss issues like you're having with wheelchair access. I understand, and I believe the rest of the commissioners understand, that people that are wheelchair bound have a more difficult way of traveling and things that we may not notice, you may notice. And so we have addressed things with the engineering department this past year and fixing some of those sidewalk ramps because of complaints like yours. So perhaps you could come to our next ADA meeting and kind of let us know where you might be having problems, and then we can take that up to the ladder to the ADA or the appropriate department to see if we can get that on the list of repairs.
What's the next meeting?
I don't know exactly, but right after the meeting, we'll get you that, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Additional questions or comments on this legislation? Mrs. Crester, would you poll the commissioners on the motion?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 8, please.
Item 8 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to purchase 5 Morning Pride Tails turnout gear, fire coat, and pant sets through the State of Ohio Department of Administrative Services Cooperative Purchasing Program from Warren Fire Equipment Incorporated of Warren, Ohio, for use in the fire department, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waddington?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion second. Discussion. Mr. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 8, please.
9
9.
is, make sure I was right. An ordinance passed, an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to purchase 1 Lucas 3.0 chest compression system from Physio Control Incorporated of Redmond, Washington, through the State of Ohio Department of Administrative Services Cooperative Purchasing Program, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules and in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion. Mr. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Now on the ordinance?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 10, please.
Item 10 is a resolution approving and ratifying the submission of a grant application to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Office of Coastal Management for financial assistance through the fiscal year 2019 Coastal Management Assistance Grant Program for the Paddle Sandusky Improving Non-Motored Boating Access Project for the Recreation Department, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Waddington?
I move for the adoption of this resolution under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
It's been a motion and second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd?
I'll be abstaining, with my involvement with paddle and climb.
Who on staff can present this legislation? I just don't think Ms. Schaefer is here.
I can speak to it.
Can you give us a little bit of an outline, Mr. Mercer?
And Aaron, I don't know if your office has been involved in the grant process at all, so Aaron can correct my mistakes when I go in, but this was a really good opportunity to apply for something that has come up several times throughout the city, is that there's been a really increased demand in the bay in particular for kayaking, canoeing, stand-up paddling. So it's a sport that folks at the Rowing Foundation I know have been working with Aaron at Pipe Creek, and Jason Whirling, our recreation program supervisor, has been working with a local committee on a water trail that would allow people to move throughout the city along the bay and lake at different points where they could put in at one part of the city and then get off and walk around, et cetera, at other parts. And so this was a quick hitting grant opportunity that the staff moved quickly on. It had a match component. Folks like Paddle and Climb and Adaptive Adventures stepped up and offered both in-kind and direct financial support to offset the local match for the grant. The goal is to make sure that the 3 locations, and these locations were picked, I know Mr. Schwanger had a question about how the locations were picked. They were picked on their ability to be adapted quickly, so that there is not a lot of other physical construction other than the installation of the launches themselves. So the boat ramp, Shoreline Park, and the basin where the sailing club exists were picked. All of those will be publicly accessible. We certainly look to bring the water trail to Lyons Park, as Mr. Schwanger asked, and we've I think he asked for a crumb for Lyons Park. I think we invested $700,000 in that park last year, and I think Kelly pointed out $2 million over the last several years. So we're well aware of the west side. We're well aware of Lyons Park. We want to see this service brought there. We know that the shoreline there needs a little bit more work than just simply slapping a kayak launch there, and so we're going to try to build that into a larger project that we look to do there. But this is a first step in what we hope to be several installations along the bay, so that you eventually, will look back and see people all along the waterfront, whether they're in kayaks, canoes, bikes, or jogging, that will give people as much accessible as possible to our wonderful natural shoreline.
Thank you. And I thought that the question that first came by email about Lyons Park made a lot of sense. But I then saw the response from Mr. Whirling that is in our plans, in fact, but it is, as you indicated, much more involved and take more planning, and it's not as simple and not something we can include in a grant at this point. So actually that made sense, but it was reassuring to know that Lyons Park is in that plan long-term.
Absolutely.
Additional questions or comments, Mr. Lockhart?
No, I was agreeing with you.
Additional questions, comments? Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Abstain.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Now on the resolution?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Abstain.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That resolution is adopted. Item number 11, please.
Item 11 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to dispose of buses as having become unnecessary and unfit for city use pursuant to Section 25 of the city charter, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules and in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Got a motion and second. Discussion. Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 12, please.
Item 12 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to purchase one light transit vehicle from Bus Service Incorporated of Canal, Winchester, Ohio, and one light transit low-floor vehicle from American Bus and Accessories Incorporated of Cincinnati, Ohio, through the State of Ohio Department of Transportation Cooperative Purchasing Program for the Sandusky Transit System, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Twine?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion. Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the ordinance?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 13, please.
Item 13 is a resolution declaring the necessity for the city to proceed with the proposed demolition and asbestos abatement of 3704 Venice Road, and directing the city manager to advertise for and receive bids in relation thereto, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd?
I move for the adoption of this resolution under the suspension of the rules and in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion. The last go, how did we, was this in the land bank, or how did we come to own this property? Or have to work on this property?
Yes, Mr. President. The city actually does not own this property. This is a privately owned property, not unlike some of the prior commercial and industrial demolitions we have done. I think as we've gone through our first tier of properties, which are the more noteworthy properties, GNC Foundry, American Crayon, we've now turned our attention with the building division and the fire department to look at that next tier of vacant commercial and industrial properties, both in terms of sort of scale, but also geographic location. So now that we've got some of the big ones out of the way or in process, we know that we have sort of that second tier 2 tackle. So through the fire department's vacant property list and through our traditional and normal building inspections, we've got sort of that prioritized list of properties that we're inspecting externally that ultimately may lead to interior inspections, and this certainly fell into that category. So this is a privately owned property, though, that we would be going out to bid on the demolition. We have provided the owners several notices and opportunities to appeal, which have not been done. So our next step then would be to bid out the demolition of the property.
So I don't know if you know, but I assume the property is probably also behind on its real estate taxes.
I believe it is. I'm not positive, although there was a recent transfer over the summer that may have brought that current, but I'm not 100% positive on that. But again, what we can tell from our inspections, regardless of the real estate taxes on the property, is that it's a severe nuisance that needs to be addressed, so.
Sure, and I appreciate that. What I was getting to next was that we then have a lien on the property for those demolition and abatement costs, correct?
Yes, what we would do is we normally would provide a bill to the private property owner and provide them 30 days to make the city whole on all of our costs. If that is not paid to the city in full, once a year, we would assess that to the real estate tax duplicate, which after a period of time could put the property into foreclosure and ultimately into the city's land bank. It would have to come back to the city commission in the future to be acquired by the city, however.
Thank you, Mr. Dasko. Additional questions or comments, commissioners? Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the resolution?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That resolution is adopted. Item number 14, please.
Item 14 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a lease agreement with Peerless Stove and Manufacturing Company for the building and land located at 334 Harrison Street, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Lloyd.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules and section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Then a motion and second. Discussion. It's good to see Peerless Stove remain there. They've long been a great business in Sandusky, and glad we were able to make an appropriate arrangement with them. Unless there are additional questions or comments, Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Now on the ordinance?
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. That completes our regular agenda items, and we turn the meeting over to Mr. Hayes report.
Thank you, Commissioner President Murray. Thank you, commissioners, audience, and staff.
I want to just remind everyone that a week from today is President's Day. So on 2/19, city offices will be closed in honor of President's Day. Also, I'd like to move on to the donations and ask that the city commission accept 2 donations for operation of the Sandusky Transit System for year 2018. One is from the city of Vermillion for $10,000, and the other is from Vermillion Community Services Incorporated for $7,500. So I'd ask for a motion to approve those donations.
Second.
It's been a motion and second. Discussion. I do have some discussion. I appreciate the gifts, but it points again to the need for countywide funding for countywide transit.
Certainly.
And I think that in the forthcoming race for the county commissioners that we need to make sure that this is something that is discussed. We need a permanent solution. You know, the city of Sandusky annually provides a subsidy of about $300,000. It's up and down, but that's not all we provide. We provide an administrator, we provide facilities, we provide HR and legal support. I mean, all told, we're probably into this $450,000, $500,000 when you consider all of our expenses. That's an expense that is borne entirely by the residents of the city of Sandusky, and it's just not fair and it's not sustainable. The next time we have an economic downturn, there will be another, hopefully it's far enough in the future, there'll be another commission sitting here, and that's one of the services that will be most needed by those very folks who are serviced by transit now, and it's going to be one of the things that we have to cut. We can't cut police and fire. But that's something that gets cut. So we need a sustainable, long-term funding solution for transit. We've talked about it for a while, but I think we need to bring that more to the fore. And I think that this year is a good time to do that and look for a cooperative solution. Most every other community that has a countywide transit system in Ohio has a tiny portion of the sales tax that's voted in by the commissioners to support countywide transit. That's certainly one funding model that's available. It's not the only one, but it's the most likely and the most common one. So I know you're asking for us to accept the donations, but I thought that was pertinent to the discussion.
Absolutely.
Or to the motion. Additional questions or comments? All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Wobser.
Thank you, Commissioner, and your points are well taken, and we'll talk as a staff amongst those who work on transit, and then reach back out to the commission to figure out how to best move that dialogue forward in 2018. Moving on to new and old business administration, we have a bicentennial update from our bicentennial coordinator, Mackenzie Spriggs. The marketing committee of the Bicentennial Commission has been working with advertising partners who will begin highlighting the bicentennial in unique ways. The Sandusky Register will have a special edition dedicated to the bicentennial on the 18th of every month in honor of the bicentennial being 1818. For Buckeye Broadband, they'll be attending events and highlighting projects through video on their Art Now series, which plays every other Sunday. Radio interviews through BAS Broadcasting will occur more regularly, featuring history segments and upcoming events. We're very excited, and the Bicentennial Banner and other events have gone very well so far. We think the celebration is off to a great start. Also, just a reminder that residents and small businesses will soon be receiving a letter in reference to the City of Sandusky's electric aggregation enrollment notification. This letter will be mailed out tomorrow, February 13th. Remember, this is an opt-out program, so residents and small businesses do not have to do anything, and they will be automatically enrolled in the program and benefit from the savings. Moving on to the police. A new department photo board of officers, reserve, and administrative staff has been placed in the department lobby. The police want to thank Recreation Program Supervisor Jason Whirling, who has moonlighted as a professional photographer in the past, as well as Eva Olcott, who's moonlighted as a professional graphic designer. We're very fortunate to have a multi-talented staff for arranging the layout of the board. So thanks to both of them, and thanks, Chief, for updating that with our strong police department. Moving on to fire, Chief Wilcox participated in the opioid listening session presented by Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur at the new Erie County Detox Center. And congratulations to Nicole Thomas and Jennifer Schoenhart, who are the winners of the smoke detector and installation of detectors at the Sandusky City Schools Parent Summit. I want to thank both our chiefs for attending that event. Moving on to the Finance Department. The city is moving forward with the online bill pay project for utility payments with Invoice Cloud and Software Solutions. Since this is a service agreement with Invoice and there's no hardware or software costs, no legislation will be needed, but we will continue to engage the community and the commission as we move forward on that project. Also, the next scheduled Finance Committee meeting is Friday, February 23rd at 7:45 a.m. in the first floor commission chambers. Moving on to the Department of Public Works. The Division of Forestry has fulfilled all service request plan for 2017 and is currently devising a service request plan for 2018. In a display of cross-departmental collaboration, the Division of Property and Grounds Maintenance will be assisting code enforcement with boulevard abatements by collecting and disposing of items throughout the city this winter. And the Division of Streets and Traffic has acquired a new 1-ton dump trunk with a plow that will aid in snow removal and daily street maintenance operations. Finally, for Public Works Environmental Design Group, submitted a grant application on behalf of the city for the 2018 Department of Natural Resources Clean Ohio Trails Fund program for the first phase of the Landing Park project. If awarded the total request of over $580,000, Cedar Fair would commit over $700,000 for the park drive and trailhead, and the city would commit almost $570,000 in funds currently allocated for the Sandusky Bay Pathway and in-kind construction administration services. Results will be known in late fall of this year. And I know we had a question from Mrs. Johnson as to this project. There was, if you remember last year in our budget, a specific allocation of funds each year for the Sandusky Bay Pathway. This match would come from that fund. So in addition to those neighborhood infrastructure programs of streets and parks and trees and sidewalks, we have set aside a specific amount each year, specifically for the Sandusky Bay Pathway, which was a project that, as we engaged the community in 2015 for the Bicentennial Vision, was really ranked probably highest among all new infrastructure opportunities. And so we'll continue to invest in that and really believe that ultimately it will be of great benefit to the entire city.
Well, it's an enormous infrastructure project, and it is one that I think is very much supported by the public. It's kind of a surprise in a lot of ways for a lot of folks because you don't even see the possibilities that are back there. It's a hard thing to see unless you get a map or you've got an aerial view. Without proper planning, there's no point in spending millions and millions of dollars over the course of years. So I think this is an excellent investment for us to make long term.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the Department of Community Development, the first Community Development Block Grant hearing will be held on Monday, February 26th, during the City Commission meeting. The purpose of the hearing is to obtain the views of the citizens in regards to the needs of the city and recommendations on CDBG expenditures for the next program year, which runs from July 1st of 2018 through June 30th of 2019. Also, just a reminder that on February 8th, this was reported in the Register, the city was paid in full, including the final interest installment for the loan made to Rick Samarsky totaling $101,750. The repayment was made by Mr. Samarsky and was made possible through the sale of 125 East Water Street, one of 3 properties owned by Mr. Samarsky. As a result of being paid in full, the city released our mortgages on all 3 properties, and the funds have been deposited back into the Economic Development Capital Projects account to be utilized for future development projects in 2018. Moving on to the Planning Department. The regular Planning Commission meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, February 28th at 4:30 p.m. in the first floor conference room. The Landmark Commission meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, February 28th, immediately following the Planning Commission meeting. And the regular Board of Zoning Appeals meeting will be held Thursday, February 15th at 4:30 p.m. in the first floor conference room. And then I'll conclude my remarks for this evening to say that one of the things is we did our neighborhood initiative that the planning department has been working on over the course of the year that was been brought up several times is that the youth of the South Side neighborhood in particular lack a splash pad that those on the west side have with Lyons Park or those more centrally located have at Huron Park. And we are looking at doing a new master plan as part of our 5-year capital plan for Churchwell Park, which really anchors that South Side neighborhood. But it was Commissioner Waddington who brought up early in the process that we could potentially bring water play to the kids in that neighborhood through more affordable measures as we look at a long-term fix like a splash pad for the park. And so as part of the Sandusky Neighborhood Initiative, one of the early projects that Talon Floor, who's been working on with the assistance of Angie and folks like Greg Woltz in the planning department, was to do some research on some things that we could debut as soon as this summer in the park. And they have found a very cool affordable water feature that will cost just a few $1,000s. And they just vetted last week with Scott Cromer, the superintendent of our services divisions, that he believes this would be a really great fix that they could help install and implement this year. We know it may not be the permanent solution for this park, but is a great option for a few years as we figure out what's happening. And I think this is just a good example of how Talon's work and the planning department's work, along with the leadership of our commissioners on issues like this, are already starting to pay dividends in our neighborhoods. So we're thankful for that. And that's all I have for this evening.
Anything, Mr. Fisher? Commissioners, questions or comments for the city manager? Mr. Wobser, I'm going to direct this question to you, but you might want to defer to Mr. Klein. The gentleman asked a question about Lincoln Street, and what is the timeline for that, Mr. Klein? Is it beyond its regular? I'm sorry, you didn't have this. You obviously did not have a chance to look at the contract to see what's going on before the meeting. But if you have any recollection, and could you give an indication as to whether we run into some problems, or beyond schedule, or maybe when it's likely to wrap up?
Yeah, that's a contract that the contractor got tied up on another project, a really large project that he had, and we were pushing and pushing and pushing to get him out here, and he came out late enough in the year to get the underground work done, but unfortunately the asphalt plants closed in the middle of November, so he couldn't finish the asphalt work. So unfortunately, he still has trenches that he's maintaining, and we called him out there again today to put more stone and stuff in those trenches, but that was something that he mobilized a little bit too late to be able to complete the project at the end of last year. So he's gonna come back as soon as the plant's open in April and do that work and fix the road and sidewalks and everything else.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Klein. additional questions or comments for the city manager? Then we will turn to old business. Anyone having any items of old business?
Mr. Chairman,
Waddington.
I got a couple things. First, I'd like to thank Chief Warzak and the police department for the $505 for the Care and Share drive that we had this past Saturday. We raised $3,000 in cash and checks, and then several donations come in, and that was in a 2-hour period. So I want to say thanks and kudos to you for that. That was really neat. The second thing, I know some of the commission, I've talked to the city manager, Justin, the law director, Dennis, Dick, I've talked to them a little bit about this, and Dick's sat at the coffee commission table with me, is that there's whispers out in the community now about the city pool again, and a possibility of having a rec center, and I think it's pretty well known that we are, or the YMCA, the possibility of moving on Cleveland Road at some time in the future, that could come. It's a strong possibility. But going forward, it occurred to me, and I checked with Mr. Brady just to make sure, and I called the former Commissioner Dan Common. When we went through the cycle before with the Showboat Robinson and the rec center at that time and how that abruptly failed, we went through a lot of missteps with that. And I just wanted to ask, like I talked to Mr. Harris today, if we could have, I don't know, at least I would like to see, are we clear as far as no liabilities or anything with Showboat Robinson? Because I know there's still some court action going on with that. There's some liens on him. As far as city, could you check and make sure that that's cut and dry? I'm just a little concerned, even though it's been a long time ago, and several folks thought that was a dead issue, it certainly is a dead issue. Now, for going forward, if we're gonna start or have a rebirth of something new along that line, I wanna make sure we don't make the same missteps going forward.
Definitely.
Okay, and I think Mr. Brady was on the commission with me in 2011 when the.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Brady.
my recollection is pretty good regarding that issue also, and I know that that commission at that point in time sat through a presentation on that issue by a gentleman, and although we welcome any type of presentation in any concepts, we have an obligation to be open-minded and listen to. That commission in 2011 did not appropriate or approve any type of expenditure, nor did we encourage any individual to invest in that. So I would be very surprised, Mr. Harris, if you would find, that we have any contingent liability on any litigation that might be going forward. But I think that's where Mr. Waddington's going, is we want to be certain that there's not someone behind the curtain here. Thanks.
Mr. Waddington, you and I have had this discussion before. I don't know what's generating the current talk about a pool or rec center. I think that if the YMCA is able to be successful and have a pool out there, that is something that Mr. Wolfster, I know, and others are looking at extending transit so that all of our residents can take advantage of that. And of course, we as a community are investing $2 million in either a refurbished or new pool at the Sandusky High School, and they do have public hours in which it's available. The kids obviously and the teams obviously take precedence, but that is available at different points in time. And on the subject of a rec center, Mr. Waddington, I just want to mention publicly what I have said to you, which is that I like the idea of a rec center, but only if it has a dedicated source of funding that's not coming out of the general fund. And that's something that if the voters want to add something to their property taxes or something like that, that's okay. But the problem with rec centers, when you take a look at them around the state and other states, is, again, we're talking about when the economic downturn comes, we're 9 years into an expansion, and that downturn is going to come at some point in time. And the problem is that when you're faced with having to cut streets or fire or police, guess what you cut? You cut the rec center, and those rec centers end up getting closed when they're at downturn. So I think it needs a dedicated funding source if we're going to have that conversation at some point in time.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I just brought it up because it's at some of the coffee meetings, you know, we need a pool, we need a rec center, and I get all that. I just want to cautiously go forward with this, you know, whatever we go, whatever direction we take.
Additional questions, or, I'm sorry, we're on to old business. Any other items of old business?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Brady.
I think this is old business because it's an issue that Mr. Waddington had spearheaded here a couple of weeks ago, and that is a community warming shelter. And on Commissioner Waddington's part, I certainly want to thank him for his efforts on that. But we have a staff person, Talon Fleur, who has picked that ball up and has really run with it. And last Thursday, we had a meeting here in this chamber of interested parties. And it was well attended. We are going to gather again next Thursday, this coming Thursday, excuse me, in the same chamber to try to iron out just exactly how we would staff that. We have an offer from New Jerusalem Church to use their facility for a community warming center, but there are the devil's always in the details, and we have some details to work out. We have outstanding cooperation from Chief Orzak and the police on assisting us in this effort. But the details we have to work out is how we're going to staff it. We think it is appropriate to reach out to the religious community across our city and see if we cannot find volunteers out of the churches to help us staff it on those evenings that shelter would be open. And we also need to determine exactly what is going to be the tripwire for opening that shelter. Is it going to be temperature? Is it going to be snow? Is it going to be wind? Is it going to be a combination of those things? So hopefully Thursday we will come to those conclusions, and I would encourage anybody either here or certainly in our viewing audience out there tonight, if you're interested in volunteering for an hour or 2 hours on those kind of days, if you show up on Thursday, we'll have a lot better details for you. Thanks.
Any other items of old business? I have one, Mrs. Cresser, you and I have talked about this, and that is we have a lot of events where we want to have representation by the commission, but sometimes we don't all get coordinated, and sometimes an important event doesn't really have the representation that it ought to have. Not all of us can attend everything all the time. But Mrs. Cresser is working with Mr. Hamilton on a way that we could more easily coordinate in terms of when we get a calendar invitation, yes or no, accept, decline, or tentative. And then if it's an important event, or any really event where we've been invited as a body, then if on that morning, if she doesn't have a couple of folks who are attending, she's going to reach out by telephone and see if some more of us might be able to free up some time to make sure the city's represented. So I appreciate Mr. Waddington, you bringing that issue up, because we did have a couple of events lately where we didn't have kind of the representation that we wanted. And Mr. Cresser, you and Mr. Hamilton working on a solution. So thank you for that initiative. And as says, we will learn more later this week about just exactly what that's going to look like. Other items of old business. Any items of new business? One, we do need to set a public hearing for March 26th at 5 p.m. regarding a zone map amendment for property located at 301 Superior Street. And if someone would care to make that in the form of a motion, I'd appreciate that. So I would request a motion to set a public hearing for March 26th.
So moved.
Thank you. And discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That hearing is set. Any other items of new business? If not, then we turn to audience participation. Anyone having any items of city business, step to the podium, give us your name and address, and share with us your thoughts.
Thanks again, Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners, Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. Perhaps through an oversight, I did not get my question answered on the $90,000 breakdown for the 3 proposed kayak/windsurfing ramps.
I made a note and forgot to ask about that at the time. Mr. Whoopser, do you know the breakdown?
We don't have the specifics yet. It'll be included in the grant when we receive it. So we can try and provide some follow-up information, but most of those questions won't be able to answer until we determine whether or not we got the award.
Okay.
but we will provide that info.
Okay, so no, again, no commitment of money or no discussions on money yet for a breakdown of it says collaboration of funds
Oh,
between.
we've had some basic discussions, but I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me, because if we get awarded less or more than the entirety of the grant, we'll have to work that out. But I'll talk to our rec folks tomorrow who are unable to make it tonight because of our adult volleyball league.
Okay.
Is on Monday evenings, and we'll provide that info as quickly as possible.
Just one general comment about some of the items that had to do with the waterfront tonight. The landing project, $570,000 from the city. And the overall Sandusky Bay Pathway, it just seems like, and also the access areas for the non-motorized boats. It just seems like a lot of items that have been, on the board since 2009 with the Lyons Park upgrade and the overall Sandusky Bay Pathway document from 2006, it might even be older than 2006, continue to take a back seat to new projects. I mean, there's Sandusky Bay Pathway nodes. There's Sandusky Bay Pathway nodes and improvements and additions that have been on the books since that document was written, and those keep getting moved down the list. And I have to tell you that, I've looked at the landing project, and it looks like, I'm not saying that, somebody that starts down at the west end of town is not gonna use the landing project, but in looking at that project in particular, the landing project, there's gonna be parking lots, there's gonna be concessions, there might be a restaurant. So who's gonna benefit the most from that project is gonna be Cedar Point, or maybe people coming from Huron. While these other projects that have been on the board since 2006 continue to get moved down, and we may never see them happen. The same way with Lyons Park. We've talked about, we've had an issue with the shoreline for at least 10 years, going on 10 years. We know that there was an access for kayaks and windsurfing, that it's probably the number 2 spot right now that's used by locals and out-of-town people. The number 1 site is the Pipe Creek Wildlife Area down at the east end. So again, Lyons Park is taking to a back seat to 3 proposed areas, and 2 of them are within walking distance of each other. We need to start seriously having conversations about how to fix the shoreline at Lyons Park and how to make that an access point for probably the second best area in Sandusky Bay to do the kayaking, the canoeing, and the windsurfing. It's normally calm, the calmest in that area of the bay, and also the east end. Everything in the middle during the summer is helter-skelter. I mean, the boating public, the power boating public, is going to wreak havoc on kayakers, canoeists that are using the Shoreline Park access point. I'm sorry, I've been a boater for 37 years. I've seen the major traffic in Sandusky Bay in that location. You have all these marinas that are very close to Shoreline Park. It's not a good spot for an access point for canoeing, kayaking, and windsurfing. Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Well, let me ask first, because it's to him anyway. And I guess this question could be to the manager, whoever wants to answer it. To Mr. Schwanger's point, maybe we can be at least thoughtful as far as liberally distributing our projects and making sure that they go out to all ends of the city. I myself would like to see the West End develop quite a bit more, which I've said in the past. To know the timeline of events, to be more communicated to the public might help too, in respect to Lyons Park. When we look at putting out whatever it is projects that we have there, would probably help Mr. Schwanger alleviate some of our worries. And plus, as we all know, the West End sometimes, and has been said, is like a forgotten child. So we want to make sure that we let them know what our plans are, rather than waiting until the perfect moment to say, we've got something.
Well,
I don't mean it.
Well, let me just say, we have invested $2 million in Lyons Park. We have the new pathway that's going to extend all the way across Venice. It's a very major investment that we're making out there. We've cleaned up GNC Foundry. The West End is one of our targeted neighborhoods in our neighborhood initiative. So, I mean, I think you can say those things, that we're neglecting the West End, but just, I mean, evidence completely disproves that. Mr. Wolfstrike?
Yeah, through the commission president to Commissioner Lockhart, Mr. Schwanger and others, I was gonna make 2 points, one of which you already made, is that the two single biggest investments outside of water and sewer that the city's made over the last 10 years are Lyons Park and the West End overpass, in addition to things like GNC Foundry, the demolition on Venice that Matt mentioned tonight. And so we're heavily invested on the West End and certainly will continue to do so. But in addition to that, just to provide an update on the overall Sandusky Bay Pathway project, Mr. Schwanger's right, there was a plan adopted in 2006. We're actually in the process of updating that entire plan now because a lot's changed over the last 12 years and the estimates for costs, land use, et cetera, have changed. We did complete a phase 1 of that, which was the portion of the trail from Pipe Creek heading east to and through the landing project. The reason for the completion of that, and I remind you that that plan was funded, 2/3 of which outside of city funds, 1/3 of which came from Cedar Point, and the other 1/3 of which came from the Erie Metro Parks. And there is an opportunity to get a grant for that project because of the massive investment being made by Cedar Point, which requires a 1-to-1 grant. So because that plan is already done, and because there's matching funds available through folks like Cedar Fair, et cetera, is why we're going through those dollars. But we certainly believe that we're investing heavily on the west side. The Venice, you nailed it. Venice Road's going to be one of the first phases of the pathway project that gets completed. Shoreline Drive will be another. So we feel like there's a good initial West End project in Venice Road leading to Lyons Park. There's a good middle of the city project in the pathway portion of Shoreline, and then eventually Meg Street. I know Director Klein's already got planned, and then this piece on the east side with the landing project. So we feel very comfortable that we're creating 3 signature investments that spread throughout the city, and then our goal will be to fill those in as quickly as possible. But we're happy, and there will be, Angie's leading with Environmental Design Group, that update of the pathway plan, which should be completed by June or July. And again, I feel very confident that we're going to be making investments in that all over town. So,
I'll step.
Wishing to address the commission.
You took a couple of minutes of my time away from me, and I don't want to walk away from this podium.
Mr. Schwager, you had your turn at bat, so you finished your remarks. We did not interrupt your remarks.
I beg to differ, but if that's the way you want to run your meeting, that's fine.
Sharon Johnson, 1139 Fifth Street. A couple summers ago, the city came down and took down some trees in my neighborhood on 4th Street between Ogons and Ontario, that one block there, and they replaced some sidewalks. Last year, I was walking around the block, and I've talked to Mr. Klein about this. I mean, I'm not getting any further on this. I don't understand why the city would leave one big tree up there that's heaved the sidewalk up 4 or 5 inches. It's pretty pronounced. I don't understand that, why they left that there, and why aren't they coming back to repair that? I'd like to have an update.
Unless you happen to know the answer off the top of your head, Mr. Klein. We all have Mrs. Johnson's email. Perhaps you could follow up with an email to let her know the situation. Okay. I don't think he knows the immediate answer to your question, Mr. Johnson.
I'd like to know at least if I'm on the list this summer, or if that's going to be taken care of.
I don't know that he has the list with him, but he won't.
Okay.
He does what he says. He'll follow up by email.
Okay. Secondly, I noticed that the auditors are urging the city to replace their vehicles, their fleet vehicles. And I was wondering, and I know this is going to get expensive because of the budget, we have left this go, and now we have to replace them all at once. That gets expensive. Why can't we have, and this is just a suggestion, to do something like the Retirement Stabilization Fund? You know how that got really expensive with all the retirements? Why can't we do kind of a stabilization fund for the fleet vehicles and keep that money from coming out of issue 8 infrastructure and take it out of general fund each year, set aside some money? I was wondering if you could look into that. Thank you.
topic for the Finance Committee.
Okay.
Anyone else wishing to address the commission? Then, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, 6:30.